Thanks, Dave. And while Carl's coming up to grab the microphone, I'm going to ask a question to Mark, which is, given that the insurance industry plays some role in driving safety for operators that utilize it, how can you give us some idea about what proportion of the industry relies on insurers versus what proportion relies on the self-insurance, for example, and how relevant is the insurance industry?
Well, I think you can say that in general, most companies are going to carry some level of insurance. Large companies tend to carry a larger self-retention or a larger deductible. So if you think about your automobile, you have a deductible that you're responsible for in the event of an accident or a loss. Same thing in liability, casualty, property insurance, there's a deductible level. And it depends on the company's ability to fund that on their own and their risk appetite. Large oil companies, for example, have a captive called the OIL, the Oil Insurance Limited. Now, even though they pay into that and they pool their risk, they still have an obligation to pay back when they have a failure. So that captive has, in effect, the same effect as an insurance company. It's just the way they manage their collective risk. And as your losses become higher, when you get into hundreds of millions of dollars, then you're tapping into a large number of insurance markets. One thing I didn't point out is that most insurers spread their risk. They share that risk. So, for example, we used to write a $50 million primary layer, but we would reinsure a bunch of that out. And then reinsurers also reinsure. So the spread of risk concept is there. Now, that means you also have more people who have skin in the game. They have an interest in seeing things done well. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thanks. Okay, Carl has the microphone for discussion, comments, questions.
Yep, we have a comment here in the back.
Hi, I'm Brigadier General Hagan. I'm the Director of Safety and Enforcement at the California Public Utilities Commission. And I just have a general comment about this is a fine forum, a great way to get all the players together to talk about these kinds of important things. San Bruno was a horrific event, changed the world as far as safety goes in California. And the Public Utilities Commission has a vested interest in that. There was 8 fatalities. 2 of them were members of our family. One was one of our employees, and the other one was her daughter. So 25% of those casualties came out of the Public Utilities Commission. So don't think we don't feel about this. I joined after San Bruno, and my mission was to change the safety culture, both in the commission and in the industry. And I've changed that mission now to change the corporate culture of the industries we regulate and the commission to embrace safety as a timeless, universal, underlying principle. It's how we do business. It's embrace it as a tool and an enhancement to do our mission. Our mission is our most important thing. That's to provide safe, reliable utilities to all the citizens. So, to us, safety consists of 3 things: climate, culture, and the processes. The processes are not the important part. It's the leadership at the top that's the important part, because they set the climate of what we stand for, our core values, our being. That drives the culture, which is our behavior, how we do business, how we make judgments. And the processes follow with the programs, etc. So I think this is a great forum to discuss those things, and I would ask you that you think about safety in those terms when you go back. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael.
This is also for Mark. For a number of years, LP gas, NGL, propane were treated a lot like they were just another petroleum product in a lot of its uses, and then it started, the dedicated NGL, LPG pipeline started to show up in the late 50s and into the 60s U.S. And the risk of it, I don't know if it was understated or just poorly understood, but there wound up being a point in the 70s that the National Transportation Safety Board and the old Office of Pipeline Safety noticed that from the statistics that only 10% of the pipeline failures of that time were causing about 50% of the deaths and injuries casualty-wise. And I don't know, eventually the standards for those lines was upgraded, but I'm just wondering if tar sands is going to be another, like what LP gas was versus just another petroleum product where just a few incidents can cause massive, in this case, environmental damage.
Well, I think I'm going to use General Hagan's plug for leadership to point to our pipeline safety management system that we talked about this morning. It's getting these safety management systems in place that's really going to help make the next jump and provide continuing improvement in safety. If we can, I mean, it's important to look issue by issue. There's a lot of work that's being done on Dilbit, and there's a lot of work being done on its corrosivity and its impact on pipelines. And that's really important work to be done. But we need to stay focused on all the threats to a pipeline, and that's a part of using a systematic, comprehensive approach to managing integrity on a day in and day out basis.
Here's one in the back.
This question's for David with the Blue Green Alliance. Are pipe fitters?
Oh, sorry.
Is there generally like an understanding of, or is there interest in pushing a mandatory retirement age on pipelines, aging pipelines, and where is labor on that? Obviously, there's a vested interest in having the job market open up in that type of way, but where is labor on mandatory retirement of these aging pipelines and these archaic weld techniques?
Well, I would hesitate to say, put a limit on mandatory. You could upgrade a pipeline, and the use of that pipeline depends heavily on pressures you're going to operate through it. The highest pressure it's going to operate under. Lots of different things you can do to make a pipeline safer. One of the 57 requirements under the Keystone was there's a bigger cushion between the operating pressure and the test pressure. And so by reducing that operating pressure, you enable a safety factor there of what the pipe's capable of doing. And so there are many ways out there to upgrade a system, and we're doing a lot of those through the integrity management. It would not be upon me to say if a system was time for retirement, that would come under the integrity management that we're talking about. And so we really haven't taken a stand as far as what the limits of a pipeline are. You just have to look at each individual pipeline and its integrity management and upkeep to know, and then the operating pressures too. And I think PHMSA has taken the same approach on that. It's just really hard to put a rubber stamp on, when a pipeline is past its useful life.
Hi, good afternoon. This question is for David. You mentioned that welders are tested for their technical capability when they reach a job site. Do they also undergo drug screening?
They do.
Okay. And is there a maximum age for welders?
There's not a maximum age for welders. That's a very good question. Welding is a hard job, and a lot of times your eyesight is affected by it, but I've also seen welders out there performing work on the job that were, late 60s and even as far as early 70s that could see better than I can at 54 years old. So, it really goes to individuals. So, no, there's no limit and no mandatory retirement age. We welcome in our rises in our work has always been ups and downs throughout my whole career. And so during those rises, we welcome those retirees and the input they have in bringing about the new members that we bring on to perform that work. But yes, we are drug tested on every project we go on. We fall under DOT specifications for that reason.
Hi, this is whether a comment or maybe there'll be some dialogue afterwards. With regard to the insurance companies, so I live on a creek that there was an oil spill, Chevron, but yet Rocky Mountain Power had the power company. Their fence had been burned by a lightning strike, which burned a hole within the pipeline and then went into the water supply and came down several miles down past my house. So dealing with the insurance companies has been, and even like the responses to move out of your house, that never came. But when we did move out of the house, 5 days later with rashes, sicknesses, headaches, nausea, 2 days after being in the hotel, the insurance company came to us and she said, well, we've tested the air in such and such a place, and it's zero. If it tests zero at your house, we're not paying for your lodging. And I was furious, and I really said, excuse my bluntness, I said, don't fuck with me. I have a criminal practice. And immediately I got a call saying, don't go anywhere, just stay where you're at. But dealing with the insurance companies as an individual has been the most challenging aspect, one of the most challenging aspects of dealing with a spill. I hope that the insurance companies and the oil companies can come to hopefully the insurance companies and the oil companies can come to an understanding that the individuals that have been affected by a spill are really traumatized.
Yeah, I can't speak to the specifics of that situation, but I'm disappointed in what I hear. I will say that the challenge is in doing it right. And there are great examples where it has been done right. When Texas Eastern had an incident in Edison, New Jersey, that damaged a large apartment complex, adjusters were out there within days, literally addressing needs, addressing concerns. And I can't speak to what should have been done and what could have been done. I know it's been done well because we've shared those examples in the industry, and there are things. It's just like the president of Pipeline of Colonial talked about this morning, being prepared to respond. Insurers need to be in that same position. And I can share with you, having worked for an insurance company, that we were always in the spotlight, always under pressure to be there for the insured and there for people that were impacted. And it's a huge challenge, and we don't always do it well. And you know, we keep pressure on. It can be done well. We've seen examples of it. It needs to be done well.
You can say who you are and where you're from. It helps.
I could go through my insurance since I can't live in my house?
It depends on your coverage. Yeah, what kind of coverages you have. If you have a liability type cover within that, it's certainly something you should look at with your attorney. That's not an area of expertise that I had at that point in time, but you know, you should always look at your coverages completely. Absolutely.
Any additional? Okay, we have one more
Hi,
back there.
my name is Simona Perry. I'm on the board of the Pipeline Safety Coalition and work with the Mayor's Council. My question is for you, Dave Barnett. We just heard David Gallagher speak about landowners being the front lines, the kind of first responders. Could you speak a little bit about how you might see labor as being, and unions and the union workers, as being some of our best, I guess, allies in terms of reporting problems that they might see on the job, and what the unions think about that, whistleblower protections, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. In our agreement with our contractors, in all of our agreements, we have safety language in there that empowers the employee to stand up and speak up when he or she encounters a safety issue, whether that be towards someone else or themselves. And they cannot be retaliated against for that reason, and we promote that. And one thing I think that unions bring to the table when you choose one of our contractors is you have a third party there that's going to work with everyone to resolve issues. And so that individual has the right to empower, or they are empowered to speak up at any time if they see something wrong, which is a great, powerful tool. They do it quite often, and they're not retaliated against. We make sure their jobs aren't lost, and fortunately we have contractors that are willing to address those issues. As far as the public and what was spoken to this morning and identifying leakage out there, the union member would be no different than any other individual out there. We have union members that live across the United States, and they very well may be one of those individuals that reports it. And maybe if they have expertise in that, they're going to pay more attention to that. So I hope I've answered your question. One thing I would like to make a statement on, if I might, is, you know, I've heard this proprietary information stuff for a long time, but it's my feeling that we need to address that issue in Congress as well. I think when the public has to live around these pipelines and what's flowing through them should be common knowledge. I think to flow a pipeline in a community that I think the proprietary issue should go out the window, and that's just my personal feeling. But these first responders, the people living close, such as the Mayflower incident, they need to know some of the risk and some of the things that can happen from what's flowing through these pipelines.
Okay, anybody else? Going once? Twice? I think that's...
Everybody keeps talking about, and the
do you want to hold on a second? The microphone's coming.
People
Thanks,
all
Ann.
over the world can't hear you on the webcast when you just start talking.
Oh, my question is about the code. I've heard it mentioned several times with different speakers. And where is this code, and is it accessible to the general public? And how do you get a copy of it? Or
Which code?
well, I don't know. I mean, I've heard this one. Somebody was talking about the ASAME code, and then in a couple of the other meetings, I heard people talking about, well, it goes to the code. So I don't know what the code is.
It's a great question. We speak in acronyms all too often. It's the Americans, well, there's a number of codes that govern the design, construction, and installation, then operation and maintenance of a pipeline. And there are several overarching bodies that develop these standards, and they're called codes, but they're standards. They're standards of engineering. The American Petroleum Institute is one that develops one. They've got one for line pipe. They've got one for valves. They have the standard for operator qualification. They've got for integrity management for liquid pipelines. There's a number of standards out there that relate to design, construction, operation, and maintenance. ASME also has a set of standards, and they sort of interlink. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers, there's one that's loosely called B31.4, which is for liquid pipelines, and then there's B31.8 for gas pipelines. And what's interesting about those codes is that they specify the design, manufacturing of steel, construction, installation, operations, and maintenance, the whole life cycle of the pipe. They've existed, API standards for line pipe has existed since 1928. And for the construction and design side in ASME, they've existed since about 1935. So they've been out there for a long time, and they have been the foundation of how pipelines were built. Yes.
Okay. The Code of Federal Regulations is the government's requirements, right. And so that is something that's very accessible. And it is what pipeline operators need to meet. Now, these standards, for example, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers standards are developed by organizations outside the government. They tend to be consensus-driven, but a lot of times they're by the industry, agreed upon as good practices. There's sometimes a lot of flexibility in them, however, and they're incorporated frequently by the federal government into their requirements. Now, one interesting thing, and those of you who have been following this issue, is that the 2011 reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act required that these industry standards be made available to the public free of charge, and all the trade associations except ASME have made that available, and there's still some questions and negotiations about how they are going to do that. it's a longer discussion than we have now, but they're very technical. That's something to keep in mind. So they're useful for people doing the hands-on work. All right. Final thank you to our panel. Good discussion.
Do you want to hand that to Rebecca on your way back? All right, we're to the exciting finale here of the Pipeline Safety Conference, which is not very exciting. It's always like the big downer point because all I'm going to do is say goodbye. But we do want to open it up if people have any questions. There's some, I thought I put another slide on here, and certain people from Marathon are going to hate me because I'm going to have to go past this one, and I might just stall on it for a second. But one thing I wanted to mention is that the Pipeline Safety Trust actually runs an ongoing, and we've had it for 10 years now. We call it the Safe Pipeline List. It's a listserv. I think there's about 600 people on it all over the country now. Not that many people talk. A lot of times it's posting news stories from all over the country, and you'll get 6 or 7 or 8, or depending on how active Michael is, sometimes 10 a day of different news stories about all kinds of pipelines around the country. And sometimes that causes some discussions, and we try to keep it very civilized. We moderate it so people don't do name calling on the list and stuff. But it's a great way to kind of keep track of what's going on all different pipelines around the country, and there's the link to it, and if you go to our website, it's there too. I was just going to try to recruit some regulators, industry, to be more active in it, because sometimes it's the public that kind of gets going, and sometimes we don't always know what we're talking about. So it's really good if people with technical expertise take part in that. And Bill Bird is often, I think Bill's left already, but he's often the lone voice that chimes in on this list when we're kind of going off the deep end. And I think he would love some reinforcements. I know it's hard for the industry folks to chime in on this, because then all of a sudden somebody that's a line person for Exxon says something, and Exxon gets blamed for it. So, but I can tell you how to set up a anonymous Google Doc or emails and type stuff. So we'd love to have more people, and there's people in the industry that send me late night emails saying, you guys are off the deep end, here's the reality, and I try to relay those on. So that's a good place to plug in if people are interested in ongoing discussion before we all get back here next year and dump powdered sugar on somebody else from Marathon maybe. Any last thoughts? What did we do good? What did we do bad? What needs to change next year? Or should we all go ride the carousel? Well, it's unanimous for the carousel, I think. I appreciate everybody here in the room. I appreciate everybody that is sitting on a little computer somewhere else watching this. And we hope to see you next year, probably back here in New Orleans. Thank you.